Let's Take This Outside with Marianne Iveson, the podcast where she speaks to athletes, outdoor professionals, and scientists about why they connect with nature.
Kyle Brittain is a freelance video journalist and weather specialist who spent over 4 years documenting various high-impact weather events across Western Canada as a reporter for the Weather Network. As a storm chaser and former wildland firefighter, some of the most memorable events he covered include wildfires, tornadoes, blizzards, high winds, and temperature extremes. He is passionate about weather forecasting, risk communication, and breaking down the science behind the weather. Please enjoy my chat with freelance video journalist, weather specialist, Kyle Brittain. Kyle Brittain, welcome to Let's Take This Outside.
Thanks a lot.
I'm excited because you have quite the background in media, right? You've been doing this for a while.
Yeah, I was a video journalist with the Weather Network for about 5 years there and had lots of fun. Cut my teeth in basically lots of live field reporting and getting out there, tracking down active weather and putting some of my interests and skills and experience to the test and trying to get those unique shots. And yeah, had lots of fun out there.
Yeah, so my expectations are high. That's what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah, right on. Let's go for it.
So what happened was I follow you on Twitter and you post the coolest landscape and weather photos. And I love whenever, I have a lot of athletes on and you are also an athlete, but whenever I have a scientist or an expert on, I think it's such a cool angle. So thanks for wanting to chat with me about the weather and nerd out a little bit.
Oh, absolutely. Super excited. Anytime people ask me about weather or they want to talk about weather, for most people it's small talk. Don't get me started because it's deep, we can... People don't know in the elevator what they're getting themselves into. And they're like, so how about that weather? I'm like, well, let me tell you.
Okay, so small talk for people. You're like, actually, this is not small talk for me.
No.
You're based in Calgary, right?
Yeah, born and raised here, based in Calgary. We have famously moody weather, lots of fascinating meteorological phenomena across southern Alberta. So that's probably where it all began for me. Actually, where it began was a fear of thunderstorms when I was a little kid and kind of spurred on this passion for severe weather. I was so scared of storms when I was a kid. The first 4 or 5 years of my life, if there was thunder and lightning, I was in the downstairs closet with my fingers in my ears, closing my eyes, waiting for the storm to pass. And then when the storm was done, I would ask my parents to take me to the library so I could take picture books of lightning, right? Just ran away from it. And now I got to go see what I was running away from. It was like a fascination and a fear at the same time. And that's actually pretty common for a lot of weather lovers, in particular storm chasers. They were terrified of storms, but then, they became kind of fascinated by what they were afraid of and they kind of grew out of their fear. Some folks don't ever really grow out of their fears, but it just keeps it. I think that's what makes it interesting, right? For storm chasers going out in the field, being near a big thunderstorm, it makes you feel alive. It's because it's always been a really intense experience for you. When you're a kid, you probably, you're afraid of it. But as you get older, it just sticks with you as a passion, right?
That was actually one of my first questions was, where did the love of weather start? As you talk about it, I can feel you're almost, when you hear a little boy talk about dinosaurs or a little girl talk about dinosaurs, right? The way you talk about weather, I see you light up. I'm like, oh, this has been a childhood. This has been a very long time that you have loved the weather, but you said it started as just being terrified.
Yeah. And I'm told that when I was young, I was a very curious, exploratory little boy. I was always on my bike riding around the neighborhood, never got lost. I had an impeccable sense of direction. My parents would ask me at age 4, spin me around in a room, take me to a mall, be like, what direction's north? And I'd be like, well, it's that way. I just have a built-in compass and in my head, and I would be always looking up into the sky. One of my first ever words was moon. I think I might have said that before, dada or something like that. I could see it in the sky, peeking above a tree somewhere. So since I was born, since I was able to think and look and, pay attention to things outside of my immediate surroundings, I was looking at the sky. And yeah, so, it was, but what really fueled it was that initial fear of thunder and lightning in particular. And, we get lots of thunderstorms here in Calgary in the summer. So, lots of practice to get over your fear over time. But yeah, that's where the passion began. But then naturally, you just start to, if you're always looking at the sky, you're always looking at the forecast. When I was a kid, I was watching the Weather Network all the time. All year round. It was just I was one of these nerd kids just watching the Weather Channel all day. I'd get made fun of at school, doing all my science projects on tornadoes and hurricanes and lightning. And everyone would just call me like weather boy or, like tornado boy or whatever. Like it was just a part of my identity growing up. So it was really interesting when I kind of came around and ended up, coming full circle and doing a career in weather for the Weather Network. I was like, I grew up watching this. Like some of the anchors that were anchoring were people that I watched. And of course, they didn't like hearing that. I'd be like, hey, I watched you when I was in like ninth grade or something. Like, yeah, So yeah, I mean, very, very much a lifelong passion, and certainly I plan to have it be my day job for the rest of my life. So
I was also going to ask as well, like, was there ever any doubt in your mind that you're like, oh no, I'm going to do this also as a career, or were you like, oh, maybe I should like, do something else and I'll do this as a passion on the side, or was there never a doubt in your mind that you're like, no, I'm going to do this forever?
Oh, there was definitely doubts. In high school, I got sick of, like, I did pure math 30 and physics, and I didn't like math very much in high school. I wasn't terrible at it, but I just wasn't super passionate. And I was like, oh man, like one of the first things you do when you go to university is you do some grueling calculus courses and differential equations and some physics and stuff where at the time I was just not super stoked about pursuing math. The other reason was that I was also a drummer. Like when I was in high school, just in a season of life where I was extremely passionate about playing music. And I think my main focus in high school was being in a jazz band and being the drummer. I was a jazz drummer. And so I actually, when I graduated high school, I went straight into university in a jazz music program and thought I would be a musician. But after that kind of fell through after a few years. So I kind of dabbled and I traveled around the world, and I worked as a glacier guide in New Zealand. I worked as a wildland firefighter in northern Alberta for a number of seasons, and pretty much everywhere I went, and some industrial rope access outdoors. Like I was known for my love of weather and always looking at the sky. And like people would be like, "Hey, Kyle, like you're the weather guy. What's going on today?" Like on my wildfire cruise, I would run weather labs for the team because weather and wildfire are obviously inextricably linked. So, I mean, I started to come around and yeah, one day there's a guy that I follow on Twitter. His name's David Spence. He was with CTV Calgary for like 35 years, like a legend out here. And I was like, hey, man, can I job shadow you? And he let me in the CTV studio. And I was like, man, like, I think I want to do this for a career. And so I kind of came full circle later in life. And I was like, I've always loved weather. I might as well pursue a career in some way or another. So yeah, like super passionate about actually weather forecasting is probably my favorite, and the communication. I love talking about weather, breaking down the science behind the weather, talking about weather impacts. Like, so, that's the Weather Network was a natural fit when I landed that gig.
How have you seen the technology advance in being able to like read weather patterns? Like, has it become a lot better, or is it kind of always been the same and maybe certain parts of the technology being able to display it are better? Or has it just become so much better than when you first started?
I mean, from when I was a kid, if you watch like early weather broadcasts, I mean, just TV in general, TV broadcasts have changed greatly. But the science of meteorology, like most sciences, are always developing, always evolving. We're making new discoveries all the time. It's amazing to think it's quite humbling to think like how little we actually understand certain processes in the atmosphere. But we have certainly made a lot of gains. Like back in the day, for instance, you could rarely get a tornado warning more than, you'd have lead time of 5 minutes or less before the thing was ongoing, right? And today we've got, you can disseminate information immediately to smartphones all throughout a warning region, and the lead time has increased in many cases to 15, 20 minutes. Not everywhere. Sometimes tornadoes pop up unexpectedly, but general meteorologists have really improved in their forecast abilities. And I mean, what's really kind of improved in addition to our understanding of atmospheric processes is weather guidance. Weather models, forecast models are basically a significant tool that weather forecasters use for predicting the weather. And as computation has increased, and supercomputers are much faster, and they have far more memory now. Like they can compute far more mathematical equations. Like you can get quadrillions of equations solved per second with today's supercomputers, which means that you can get pretty detailed, accurate weather forecast guidance from models. They're really interesting when you think about it. Is like a weather model has a whole bunch of sophisticated mathematical equations that meteorologists have tried to quantify, processes in the atmosphere. And like imagine like wind blowing over through a parking lot and over some trees, and like how swirly and chaotic it is and stuff. Like imagine trying to quantify that and put it into an equation. So it's just amazing to me to think how how far we've come. And by the way, that type of thing we haven't found a way to quantify it just yet. So it's called what we call parameterized. Means it's just like you give your kind of best guess. There's like a reasonable equation that'll represent these types of chaotic processes. So, weather in general is a very, there's a lot of chaos in meteorology and in fluid dynamics and whatnot. But in general, we're getting better at quantifying it and ingesting that data into weather data, into supercomputers and generating forecasts. So, I mean, that's a long-winded way of answering your question, is saying like technology has really improved. Our ability to compute is really improved. And that's certainly helping with weather forecasting. It's becoming more accurate with time. So it's exciting to be a part of this field. Things are changing quickly. It's to the point that, like I say, these weather models are getting so good that they may automate certain parts of weather forecasting, where it's just like, your app that you see pick up a lot of the weather conditions you see in your whichever weather app of choice are automatically generated by computers. And in the realm of meteorology, it's going to be kind of more a transition toward just communication, like impacts and finding people who are working in weather. It's going to be either these modelers that are making these weather models behind the scenes, or it's going to be communicators. It's not going to be like just armies of people in a weather office making forecasts, because like forecast models are getting really good, and you're going to start to be able to automate some of that stuff.
You're a freelance video journalist now. What does that look like for you? Are you just appearing on different forms of media and giving weather, or are you storm chasing? Like, what does that look like for you at this very moment?
Well, at this very moment, it's been kind of slow the last few months, which has been, partly because I've actually been able to take some time to kind of focus on some personal development, personal growth, research, stuff like that. Things that I never really had the time to do while I was working as a video journalist employed by the Weather Network. But as a freelancer, that's given me a lot more freedom to do a number of different things. I spent quite a bit of time this past winter doing like presentations, like just talks at like the library or schools, and kind of like got a lot of really fun stories and crazy stories and videos and photos from my time working for the Weather Network, and before that even as a storm chaser. So I have a lot more freedom to go out there and document that active weather. So occasional gigs writing articles and doing radio interviews and things like that. But certainly hoping to keep at least some part of my schedule open for freelancing going forward. As long as I'm able to have an outlet for forecasting and documenting this stuff, like I'm happy.
Let's take this outside with Marianne Iveson.
Please disagree with me if you think I'm wrong. We've had some wild weather in Canada in the last few years. The fires out west, I know that's been a big issue as well. I would love to know, what is the most fascinating weather story that you have ever covered? And have you ever had any very scary, my life is in danger moments? Because for most people, when we're seeing these massive hurricanes, or, in Ottawa specifically, we had, I think it was 7 or 8 tornadoes a few years ago, right? Touchdown in a day. These are scary moments for people. So I couldn't imagine being the one actually chasing it and looking at it and studying it. So what kind of stories do you have when it comes to these fascinating weather patterns or storms?
Yeah, I would say that there's a number of them. Maybe I'll give you a quick rundown of my favorite ones, and you can tell me if you want.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
There's fascinating weather at all times of the year here in Alberta. Like in the winter, we get really strong, what's called downslope wind events. Like you've heard of probably Chinook winds, or just a warm wind that we get in the winter that melts the snow and kind of breaks up the winter cold. But those winds can become quite violent at times. Like I've been driving behind a truck that got tipped over right in front of me by these strong winds, or stood on a mountaintop getting blasted by 193 kilometer-hour winds, knocking me right onto my butt, like literally. So, we got everything from winds to, blizzards, zero visibility, camera getting knocked over in 90 kilometer-hour winds and on live TV. And summer storms are my main passion. So I would say, I've had some definite nail-biting experiences chasing storms. For the most part, you want to live to chase another day. So, a lot of people consider storm chasers adrenaline junkies, and there may be a little bit of that. Like I say, most of us are kind of motivated first and foremost by our love and passion for severe weather, and just like feeling alive, being near these storms and seeing nature in such a state of just awesome power, right? So I've had close encounters with lightning. I've had close encounters with large hail, wrecked vehicles in large hail. We've been pretty close to tornadoes. so far haven't been hit by a tornado and never planned to. But, you see some of that coming out of the States where storm chasing is getting very popular. And of course, you see some concerning trends. I mean, the people document these types of storms in different ways. Like the best way is to document it from a safe distance, but close enough that you can kind of really see what's going on. And it comes down to years of experience, and it's trial by fire, and hopefully you don't make a big mistake. That's why you typically want to start conservative, and you get to really understand these storms, how they work. That's why it's really behooves storm chasers to take the time to learn the meteorology, specifically for even how to forecast these and how to identify features in the storms and kind of predict how they're going to behave in the near future. So, but they play a really important role in say like the weather warning process. Like it's the eyes on the ground. It's the ground truth for guys in the weather office that are issuing warnings and warning the public about these storms. So, I would say summer storms, I've had some crazy moments, and then wildland fires. Like you mentioned the fires in BC, 2021, I would say that's probably my most memorable assignment that I've covered to date. Was the fires of 2021. I was in Lytton, which is a village in southwest BC, about 150 kilometers northeast of Vancouver. It touts itself as Canada's hotspot because it often is. We targeted that as a town to go when we expected the record high temperatures. It hit 49.6 Celsius on June 29th, 2021, which is the highest temperature in Canadian history by a large margin. It was unprecedented heat. Unfortunately, after 3 days of record heat in Lytton, a fire came and burnt the whole thing to the ground in 20 minutes on June 30th. And then the whole summer was just a summer of it was hell in southern BC, literally just massive fires of threatening major town. Like Vernon, BC, near 50,000 people lived there. They were on evacuation alert for a while and definitely, impacted some other communities there. That summer, I saw these fire-generated thunderstorms. Actually, it was the night before Lytton burnt down. I was on my way back. We just hit the record temperatures on my way back to Kamloops, and it's called a pyrocumulonimbus cloud. It's a fire-generated thunderstorm. The the conditions were just right that these smoke plumes, with how violently and how hot these fires are burning, that they could explode right up into the stratosphere, basically. These clouds were probably 16, 18 kilometers tall, generating their own lightning, starting their own fires. Like this is smoke from a fire generating more lightning that generates more fires. Like just incredible. It's like watching a volcanic eruption. So watching this fire for a couple of days, just dropping lightning, and I got in pretty close before they closed the road to the public. I was able to get in close and document some of the flames on that thing. Because as a former wildland firefighter, I was on that beat, kind of like, I know exactly what they're doing out there. I can kind of speak to what the firefighters might be, how they're working and what's not working for them, and how to safely get in close without, having a risk of getting my escape routes cut off. And documented flame lengths of like, oh man, it was like 150-foot flames that was generating this fire generated thunderstorm northwest of Kamloops on the 30th of June. And I mean, later that summer, I went back like mid-August, the sky turned like this apocalyptic orange one evening. And then the next day at like 4 p.m, it turned pitch black. And it was because there were two fire smoke plumes, one from the one near Vernon, BC, and another one closer to Kamloops. They kind of like overlapped, and it just blocked out all the sunlight. It was pitch black. Crickets started singing in the middle of the afternoon. It was the most eerie experience I've ever had to this day. I would say, like, it just doesn't, you can't imagine what, people in, ancient societies, if they ever witnessed something like this, what you'd think that was happening. You'd think it was the end of the world. Like, where did the sun go? What's going on? Like, it was terrifying on just a gut level, just to see something like that. You look at the clock and it's like 4:00, but you can't see a thing out there. High beams on, like people are kind of panicking. They're driving away from the fire. And it was probably one of the most intense things I've ever experienced, even, being close to lightning bolts that have nearly vaporized us, and large damaging hail and tornadoes. It's all intense stuff. But I would say, like, the wildfire story in BC in the summer 2021 was very impactful. And it's not easy to cover those stories. Like, it's, as a reporter from a human perspective, I mean, if you allow yourself to get invested in your story, like you meet these people that live in these towns, you get to know them, and then the town burns down. It's devastating. It's heartbreaking. Like, it was horrible. And it's just tiring because, like, fires they're damaging. It's not like a pretty thunderstorm over the prairies. Like, it's destroying property. It's making the air toxic to breathe. it's, and as a wildland firefighter in the past, like, I've never seen fires even remotely burning that intensely as I saw on that assignment. So yeah, I would say that's probably my most memorable one.
Actually, you answered my question. One of my questions was going to be, do wildfires create their own weather patterns? But you already answered that.
Yeah.
What was the storm called?
So pyro is for fire, and then cumulonimbus. So a cumulonimbus is just like a big, tall thunderstorm cloud, really deep, tall, vertically developed cloud. Common across the country, many areas of the world, pretty much anywhere in the mid latitudes or lower are seeing these types of thunderstorm clouds. But to see them generated strictly by smoke over a fire, and like it's, the water vapor from the trees being burnt and vaporizing the moisture, and that's going up. And yeah, it's a pyro. There's it's a flammagenitus cloud. It's just a cloud that's like a fire generated cloud. It's the same thing as that you'd see over a volcano. That's a flammagenitus type cloud. Those ones can obviously go way higher, but it certainly looked like it, and it's capable of getting so tall and blasting up into the stratosphere so that you can actually get some of this smoke up in the stratosphere where it doesn't dissipate quickly. Like it can get caught up in the upper level winds, float around the world for some time. And if you had like a massive firestorm or a gigantic volcanic eruption, just put a bunch of ash up into the stratosphere, you could actually see global cooling for, a period of time for a couple of years where, yeah, like it blocks out the sun's incoming energy, and it can actually reduce temperatures if you have enough wildfire activity for a couple of years, once it kind of washes out of the stratosphere. These are gigantic clouds. And yeah, so like they do generate their own weather. Like when I was in close to the fire at night, it was like a vacuum. I mean, you have this extremely superheated air over the top of the fire. You have this local column of low pressure. So all the air around the fire is basically higher pressure locally. So it's just like a vacuum, and it sucks it in. And so no matter where you are around this fire, if there's not a lot of strong wind, the fire itself can generate like local winds around it that'll just kind of like ingest more of this oxygen rich air and cause the fire to burn even more intensely. So yeah, and you can have they're called pyro vortices. Any pyro vortex is like a spinny, like a tornado. It's a fire tornado.
I was going to ask you about, have you seen a fire tornado?
I haven't seen one, but they exist. I believe it was the Camp Fire in California in 2018, maybe it was. One of the horrible fires they had in California in the last few years had a pyro vortex that actually like threw cars through the air. Yeah, I mean, it's violent winds. Like it would be the equivalent to like an EF3 tornado, which is winds in excess of like, 200 plus kilometers an hour, 220, So, I mean, yeah, they generate lightning, they generate wind, hail, tornadoes. Like these are the biggest wildfires. Scary stuff.
Is there any, and as we're talking about this devastation and how many lives it's affected, so I don't want to take that lightly, but is there any weather phenomenon on your bucket list that you would like to experience? You're nodding your head. Is there something you'd like to see?
Yeah, I mean, and to be clear, most weather lovers, obviously weather is highly impactful, especially these extreme events. No weather lover in their right mind is cheering on any sort of damage.
Right. We want to make that clear,
yes,
that we don't want these things to happen. We don't want anyone to get hurt.
Yeah, no, you're not cheering on the death and destruction, and like that's horrible. And many storm chasers in certain areas, actually, they've been impacted themselves. Like some people that live in the States of, they're out chasing a hurricane and it destroys their own house. Like that's like, the thing is it's going to happen, right? These things are happening regardless of whether we chase them. So it's just for weather lovers, they just want to see what the atmosphere is doing in real time, right? So for me, bucket list items, I mean, you can never see, the best tornadoes are the ones that are over open rangeland that don't hit anything. A pretty tornado that, it's just in a big field. There's never enough tornadoes to see. Like there's always all kinds of different tornadoes that happen. I would say, most storm chasers are really interested in seeing tornadoes because they're very rare, elusive, very powerful, very striking phenomenon. And there's some really cool lightning that happens in certain parts of the world. What's called the Catatumbo lightning, which occurs in northern Venezuela. It's almost a daily occurrence there. So you can go and watch lightning on over 300 days of the year at night, just due to the shape of the land. It's perfect for generating thunderstorms. And northern Australia, Argentina, Italian coastline, basically storm hot spots around the world. I would love to be able to kind of, I've done a lot of world travel, but the focus was never weather. It was always outdoor type stuff, but never outdoors in terms of weather. I was never storm chasing in other countries. I've chased in the United States in Tornado Alley across the Canadian prairies, but I've never actually gone to like Europe or South America for the purpose of weather. I think it's more like documentation goals. Like I'd love to get a drone up near a tornado to get some footage in because there's been a couple really fantastic videos shot in the States, but not here in Canada yet. So I'd love to be one of the pioneers of that here in Canada. So yeah, probably just surrounding more like severe thunderstorms, seeing severe storms in different areas of the world would be on my bucket list.
I know you don't have a crystal ball, like a magic 8-ball. I know you don't have a crystal ball, but we've had some extreme weather in Canada the last few years. Does it seem that way because of like social media and us being able to see more? Is it concerning? Will these huge weather events continue? So essentially I'm asking you like about climate change, and are these going to get worse, or are we just more aware of them now because of social media and the information that we have available?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a really good point about dissemination of information. Like back in the day, you had to wait till first thing the next morning to read about something in the newspaper. Or maybe it took several days to really kind of grasp the seriousness of what's going on. And, now devastating flooding is occurring in some part of Germany. You can find out just by opening Twitter while it's happening and watch some guy's live stream of some devastating flooding happening. So there's certainly some of that. Throughout history, there have been significant weather events. So we have to remember that, we can have what's called recency bias and see that, oh man, last year it was just so bad. We had so many bad, weather events happen. But I mean, there's been times throughout history where we've seen high impact weather, of course. And one of the things too is that before we had the ability to disseminate information, warnings get people kind of prepared for these types of storms. And we hadn't taken too many measures to kind of like adapt to or mitigate these types of disasters, like say the Calgary floods in 2013 or Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans in 2005. I don't think there was a precedent for some of these events that infrastructure was not set up to handle that amount of water, for instance. And so you make the changes afterwards being like, wow, this could happen. We didn't know this could happen. This can happen. So we better, make some changes. And then you get subsequent storms later on and you have like far less catastrophic damage. So I think we're learning with time. It's always tricky to make a connection between individual weather events and climate change, because climate change does not cause individual weather events, but it makes certain types of weather events more likely. So what we expect with climate change is, and there's always some natural climate variation that's going on, but it does appear that we are seeing evidence of significant human-caused climate change in the last century. Now, that obviously is up for debate, but it's certainly the majority consensus in the scientific community that it is occurring and largely driven by, human activity. And so but we're still learning. The thing is with climate and weather are not the same thing. Weather is happening right now. Climate is weather over a long period of time. We're talking on the order of decades. And so I think it's hard to tell. We're looking for long-term trends, and we're looking for how things are changing with time. And we're still trying to understand how climate change may be contributing to certain events. Like, is it making, with a warming planet, we would expect, say, stronger tropical cyclones because the air is warmer, which means it's able to hold more moisture, which means these storms and the warmer, the warmer earth, the warmer planet, the warmer water over the oceans could typically generate stronger storms in those cases. Where in Western North America, if we see a trend toward drying and warming and longer summer seasons, shorter winters, drier conditions, and this is what we are starting to see is the trend is perhaps more winter precipitation in parts of Western North America, but if it's warmer, that means the freezing levels are higher, which means that the rain, it's actually falling more as rain than snow. So reservoirs are not as high, and actually by the time you get to summer, if summers are longer and hotter, then these are prime conditions for drying out potential fuels, which is like, the forests of Western North America with longer, warmer summers and shorter, warmer winters, cold enough conditions to kill pests in the forests that can eat the trees. And then that makes additional fuel for these fires. And then there are other human-caused aspects to that as well, where say, how have we been managing forests for the last few decades? Is, if we want to always put every single fire out as soon as it starts, these forests need to burn, and they have burned in the past just naturally as a part of kind of cleaning up the forest and regenerating the forest. And so there's many factors that contribute to it. But what we do see is with a warming climate and a warming planet, which is certainly the case, at least in the last century, we've seen some significant warming in the last 50 years. It seems to be a little bit faster than you would expect. Well, a lot faster than you would expect with normal climate variation. Then, we're looking at what could potentially happen with how that could change the climate. It looks like it's destabilization of, say, the jet stream pattern around the world. If you have if the jet stream that travels around the world is not as strong, which is basically a river of air that flows around the mid-latitudes all year round and is especially strong in the winter. If it's warmer overall, your jet stream is probably not as strong, which means that it can actually become more unstable and it can get stuck in these blocking, these kind of stagnant patterns, which means if you're in an area, it's more likely to rain because of the upper air pattern and it stays there for longer. You have more risk of flooding over time because the air is stagnant, the upper air pattern is stagnant. And then on the other side of the coin, you have this stagnant upper level ridge, for instance, and it's sunny for much longer than it would normally be. The air pattern's not moving along. So now you have a higher risk of drought. And so with this destabilization, we expect certain things like, increased wildfire activity, intensity, increased flooding, increased droughts, so we do see that trend in that direction. But like we say, we're watching the long-term trends, and what we really need to see, it takes time. We're going to have to see where we're at 3 decades from now. How have we changed, and really take those steps to mitigate the effects of climate change. If we start to see, we could get, Calgary can have this 1 in 1,000-year flood more frequently now because of how things are changing, then we better amp up our infrastructure to be able to handle these events so that we don't have such a catastrophic loss the next time it comes around. So yeah, adaptation, mitigation is a big part in that too, because we do see these high impact storms occurring.
I have one more angle and question for you. I know you love to play outside. I know you like to ice climb. I know you love the outdoors. As a weather expert, does it come in handy for prepping, for layering? And do you truly believe there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad layers?
Well, you're asking the wrong guy, because what most people would call bad weather, that's the fun stuff for me. I like bad weather. I'm always looking for it. You learn quickly when you play outside in the weather how to prepare for it, because it's just no fun when you're soaked to the core, or, you learn when you go ice climbing in the winter, don't over layer when it's cold, but you got to wear minimal layers when you're hiking up to the climb, because if you get soaked and then you stop to belay your buddy up the ice climb and you're freezing, it's just no fun. You get the screaming barfies. Have you ever heard of the screaming barfies?
Yeah. Can you explain what they are? But yeah, I know what they are, but yeah.
Yeah. It's a term used among ice climbers, but it could happen to anyone, I guess, if your extremities get really cold, your fingers, your toes, freezing cold. And then when the blood starts to come back into them, so say you've just climbed a pitch of ice and your hands are freezing because you hiked up to the climb wearing one pair of gloves, your gloves are soaked with sweat, and then you stood and you belayed your buddy for an hour and a half, then you climbed a hard pitch, your hands froze, and then you shake your hands out and the blood comes back and it stings like nothing you've ever experienced, so that you want to either scream or barf from the pain. The
screaming barfies. Yes, of course.
Exactly. So yeah, that's once you've experienced, freezing and, due to your own error of, I wore too many layers or not enough, or, like chasing blizzards is tricky because you're out there getting soaked and standing in the snow, sideways snow, and you got to find, your hotel and go and have a hot shower every few hours and come back out and get soaked again, bring lots of different layers. And definitely, like, if you're out in the elements, you got to know how to be prepared for it to stay comfortable and safe and healthy, right? So,
you know what I feel like? I feel like I met you at a party and I'm like, oh, you like weather? Can you tell me a little bit more about it? And then we just chatted for 40 minutes.
Like I say, don't get me started on this stuff. Like those long-winded answers that you're probably just like yawning. It's like,
no, it's like,
I could keep going. I had to like exercise some self-control and be like, okay, no, they don't want to hear this.
No, that's what podcasts are for. We're supposed to talk about this. I love it. Kyle, thank you so much. Do you have a website? Do you have anything that people can go to? Your Twitter's pretty hot, right? You have like 20,000 followers on there.
Stay tuned to Twitter. It's Kyle Brittain WX. I do intend to start amping up my my freelancing and my content creation game. So there may be a new YouTube channel coming up soon. And I would love it if you'd subscribe if you like anything to do with weather and Yeah, so that'll basically be that. But yeah, Twitter's kind of where it's all happening right now. And stay tuned in the next few months because it's about to be storm season and I'll definitely be out there.
Thanks, Kyle. And thanks for sharing your love of the outdoors and crazy weather. Absolutely.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. For more Let's Take This Outside, go to letsttakethisoutside.ca.
Produced and distributed by the Sound Off Media Company.